Some people do not leave loudly. They do not argue. They do not explain. They do not even give you a final conversation. One day, they are simply gone. Have you ever noticed how certain people can disappear from your life as if nothing ever existed between you? No warning, no closure, no real explanation. And the strange part is, the silence often hurts more than the departure itself. I am the Watcher, and here in Shadow Insight, we explore the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior. Because most people believe disappearance is about indifference, but human nature is rarely that simple. Sometimes people disappear because they are overwhelmed, sometimes because they are ashamed, sometimes because staying would force them to confront parts of themselves they desperately avoid, and sometimes their silence is the message. Watch carefully, because by the end of this video, you will understand why certain people vanish without warning, and why the real reason is often far more uncomfortable than most imagine. If you've ever experienced this kind of silence, subscribe to Shadow Insight and tell me in the comments, what hurts more, the truth or never getting one at all? At first, the disappearance rarely makes sense. Everything seems normal. They reply to your messages, they laugh with you, they make plans, they act present. And then suddenly, something changes. The responses become shorter. The energy becomes colder. The enthusiasm quietly disappears. Most people notice the change, but ignore it, because human beings naturally protect themselves from emotional discomfort. So they create reassuring explanations. They're probably busy. They must be stressed. Maybe they just need space. But with time, you begin to notice something strange. People who are about to disappear often begin emotionally leaving long before they physically leave. Have you ever noticed how someone can still talk to you while already becoming psychologically distant? Their body is there, their words are there, but their presence slowly fades. And this is why sudden disappearances feel so confusing, because in reality, they are rarely sudden. The signs were often there from the beginning. Small delays, reduced curiosity, less emotional investment, a strange emotional neutrality. Human nature always reveals itself eventually. Even silence has patterns. Sometimes the person avoids deep conversations. Sometimes they become strangely polite. Sometimes they stop sharing details about their life. And occasionally, they start treating the relationship like an obligation instead of a connection. But most people miss these signals because they focus on words instead of emotional consistency. The strange thing about people is, they often announce their departure without ever saying it directly, not through honesty, but through emotional withdrawal. And the more attached you are to someone, the harder it becomes to see it clearly. Why do people disappear instead of simply telling the truth? Because honesty is emotionally expensive. Most people think disappearance is an act of cruelty, but very often it is an act of avoidance. Jung believed that people hide the parts of themselves they fear the most. And one of the most feared parts of human nature is the inability to confront emotional discomfort directly. Have you ever wondered why some people would rather vanish than have one difficult conversation? Because disappearing allows them to escape guilt temporarily. No confrontation, no responsibility, no emotional exposure. They do not have to witness your reaction. They do not have to explain their contradictions. They do not have to admit they changed their mind. And above all, they do not have to feel like the bad person. The human mind is constantly trying to protect its own self-image. Even when someone hurts you, they usually create internal justifications to preserve their emotional comfort. That conversation would only make things worse. They'll move on eventually. It's better this way. But beneath these rationalizations, there is often fear. Fear of conflict, fear of vulnerability, fear of being emotionally seen too clearly. Freud once suggested that people spend enormous energy avoiding inner tension. And disappearance is sometimes exactly that, an escape from psychological tension. Because staying would require emotional maturity. It would require clarity, accountability, emotional courage. And many people were never taught how to face uncomfortable emotions directly. So instead, they disappear quietly and hope time will complete the conversation for them. But silence does something strange to the human mind. When there is no explanation, people begin creating their own. And often, those imagined explanations become more painful than the truth itself. But here is the uncomfortable truth most people never realize. Disappearance is not always about fear. Sometimes it is about power. Have you ever noticed how silence can completely destabilize someone emotionally? No response, no closure, no certainty, just absence. And absence has psychological power because the human mind struggles to process unfinished emotional experiences. Adler believed that human behavior is often deeply connected to control, insecurity, and hidden feelings of inferiority. And sometimes disappearing gives people a sense of control they could not achieve through honesty. The person who leaves silently controls the narrative. They decide when communication ends. They decide what remains unanswered. They decide who stays confused. And for some individuals, that control becomes emotionally satisfying, especially in relationships built around validation. The strange thing about human nature is people often want emotional connection until the connection starts demanding emotional responsibility. That is when withdrawal begins. Some disappear because they lost interest, some because they found someone else, some because intimacy exposed parts of themselves they were trying to hide. But others disappear because uncertainty itself becomes a weapon, a silent form of domination. Because uncertainty keeps the other person emotionally attached, still thinking, still analyzing, still waiting for clarity that may never come. And modern life has amplified this behavior. Technology allows people to disappear without truly disappearing. They still watch your stories, still appear online, still exist at the edge of your attention, close enough to remain psychologically present, but distant enough to avoid emotional accountability. And this creates a dangerous illusion. You begin searching for meaning inside fragments, a like, a view, a delayed response. But human nature always reveals something important here. When someone truly values your emotional well-being, they do not leave you trapped inside confusion intentionally. Because emotionally mature people understand something most never learn. Silence can wound people more deeply than honesty ever could. But before judging those who disappear, there is a more difficult question to confront. What if, at some point in your life, you also disappeared emotionally from someone? Not physically, emotionally. Have you ever stayed in conversations you no longer felt connected to? Have you ever delayed honesty because you feared hurting someone? Have you ever slowly withdrawn instead of clearly expressing what changed inside you? The uncomfortable reality is, most people experience both sides of this dynamic, the abandoned and the one who silently leaves. Because human beings are full of contradictions. We want honesty, but fear confrontation. We want deep connection, but fear emotional exposure. We want to be understood, while hiding the parts of ourselves we believe others may reject. And this is where the real mechanism reveals itself. People do not disappear suddenly. They often disappear the moment a relationship stops supporting the version of themselves they want to maintain. Watch carefully. Some relationships survive because both people continue performing emotional roles for each other. The supportive one, the confident one, the needed one, the admired one. But the moment those roles begin collapsing, distance quietly appears. Because many human connections are less stable than they seem. Not always built on truth, but on emotional equilibrium. And when that equilibrium breaks, some people choose honesty, others choose silence. The dangerous part is that silence forces the abandoned person into self-interrogation. What did I do wrong? Was any of it real? Why did they become cold so suddenly? But with time, you begin to understand something important. A person's disappearance often reveals more about their emotional limits than your value. Human nature works this way more often than people admit, because the inability to communicate clearly is usually not a sign of emotional strength. It is a sign of emotional avoidance. And the people who disappear without warning often leave behind one final hidden message. They were unable to face the emotional weight of their own truth. So why do people disappear without warning? Because disappearance is rarely just about leaving. It is often about avoidance, fear, control, shame, emotional immaturity. And sometimes, it is the only way certain people know how to escape discomfort. But the real revelation is this: the silence that confuses you the most usually says more about them than it does about you. Most people spend years believing they were abandoned because they were not enough, not attractive enough, not important enough, not lovable enough. But human nature is far more complex. Very often, people disappear because genuine emotional honesty would force them to confront parts of themselves they are not ready to face. Their contradictions, their guilt, their emotional limits, their hidden need for control, their fear of vulnerability. And instead of facing those things directly, they choose absence. Because absence feels safer than truth. Watch carefully. The people who communicate clearly may hurt you temporarily, but the people who disappear without explanation often leave invisible wounds that last much longer. Not because they were powerful, but because uncertainty keeps the human mind emotionally trapped. And this is why closure rarely comes from the person who disappeared. It comes from the moment you stop searching for meaning inside their silence. I am the watcher, and here, in Shadow Insight, we observe the hidden mechanisms people rarely talk about. If this video made you see human behavior differently, subscribe to Shadow Insight. And tell me in the comments, have you ever realized that someone was emotionally leaving long before they physically disappeared? Because in the end, what does it say about human nature when silence becomes easier than honesty?